Hello everyone, I'm Dr. Erica Austin. I'm a faculty member here at the UAB School of Public Health in the Department of Biostatistics, and today I'm going to talk with you about the Student Honor Code. Now I know it's written in very technical language, so what I'm going to do is provide some concrete examples of different forms of cheating and plagiarism, and then give some tips on how you can avoid participating in any form of academic misconduct. The UAB School of Public Health Student Honor Code covers 4 key areas of academic misconduct. We'll focus on the first 2, cheating and plagiarism, as they relate most directly to coursework. Misconduct in research and breach of confidentiality relate more directly to research, and these both will be discussed in much more detail by a research mentor or any principal investigator that you work with in the future. We'll start by discussing cheating. This is the most straightforward type of academic misconduct, and we all know what the classic forms of cheating look like. If you think back to the elaborate schemes that students developed in high school to sneak materials into exams, like writing on their arm or writing on their shoe. And we kind of laugh about those ways of cheating because they seem so obvious, and yet we all agree that they are clear violations and are considered cheating. Now, because of the increased use of technology in the classroom, in the form of phones and iPads and the use of Canvas, the forms of cheating that we typically see have changed. And what's interesting is that research shows that students don't view this kind of cheating through technology, the same as more traditional forms of cheating. But I want to make it very clear that cheating through technology is absolutely a violation of the Honor Code in the exact same way that cheating in the more traditional sense is. And the consequences are the same, whether it's a failing grade on the assignment, a failing grade in the course, or even being dismissed from the program. The most common form of cheating that we see is copying another student's answers on an assignment or an exam. And now that most submissions are electronic, students think that this form of copying can't be detected, but I promise you it absolutely can be. And it's important to note that both copying another student's work or allowing another student to copy your work are both considered cheating and both result in the same penalties under the Honor Code. The second key form of cheating that we see is the unauthorized use of materials. And again, this has changed as technology has changed. The most common way that we see this sort of violation now is through the use of phones. So, for example, we recently had a situation where a student left the classroom during an exam and went into the bathroom to look up answers on the phone. And the faculty member figured out that this is what was happening, and the student was charged with an Honor Code violation. So remember, violations that use technology are treated exactly the same as any other instance of cheating. One of the biggest concerns that students have around cheating relates to the issue of collaboration and what amount of collaboration is appropriate. This is going to be determined by each faculty member in the context of a particular course and even in the context of a particular assignment. And so it's crucial that you ask careful questions, either by looking at the syllabus, looking at the assignment itself, or asking the faculty member directly what form of collaboration is considered appropriate here. Collaboration is a very important learning tool, and it's something that we do a lot of in public health, but you absolutely must be clear on what collaboration is appropriate and what crosses the line into cheating. And the only way to know that for sure is by asking that particular faculty member what their expectations are. So while cheating is very widely understood, we all know it when we see it, students often struggle to understand precisely what constitutes plagiarism. And students often believe that plagiarism is kind of a gray area, and I think that there's an expectation that any mistakes that students make with regard to plagiarism will be overlooked, that they'll just be considered mistakes rather than an intentional act, and that there won't be consequences related to plagiarism. That is a very risky approach. And so I think it's much better to learn the basics of avoiding plagiarism so that it's not even an issue, so that no argument could ever be made that you have participated either intentionally or unintentionally in plagiarism. Part of the reason that plagiarism can't just be overlooked is that it can be either intentional, something that a student knowingly does, or unintentional. And the problem is that faculty can't distinguish between the two. And so the penalties have to be the same because there's no way to tell whether it was an intentional or an unintentional act. Now, of course, many forms of plagiarism are just very obviously wrong, and these forms look very similar to cheating. So this includes directly copying someone else's work into your own. I'll never forget the time I assigned students to write an essay about Kinsey, the sex researcher, after watching the movie about him, and every single student in the class had the exact same introductory sentence for their essay. And I, of course, realized that it was taken directly from Wikipedia. So that was an instance in which every single student participated in, intentional plagiarism by stealing that sentence from Wikipedia. Another form of plagiarism that students often don't realize is a violation is submitting work that is your own, but that was prepared for another purpose. In general, unless it is explicitly stated otherwise, the expectation of faculty is that anything that you submit as an assignment or an exam or a paper in their course is prepared specifically for that purpose. To submit something that you wrote for another course or that you wrote as a research article without getting explicit permission to do so is also considered plagiarism. It's self-plagiarism, but it is plagiarism in the same way, and the consequences can be the same. The more common forms of plagiarism, what we might call unintentional plagiarism, are situations in which students don't understand or don't take enough time to avoid things like inappropriate paraphrasing or failing to include adequate references for material taken from sources. So let's look at those forms of plagiarism in more detail now so that we can be sure to avoid those in the future. Because again, the consequences for plagiarism, whether it's intentional, whether it's unintentional, are the same. So the first key way that we can avoid plagiarism is through paraphrasing. Paraphrasing is the process of putting someone else's ideas in your own words. And it's important to distinguish here between someone else's ideas and language. You're expected to draw on other authors' ideas, right? That's how we do science, is by building on previous research and by synthesizing the results of lots of different studies and bringing them together. The ideas you are expected to draw on, but you can't use their same language. That's considered stealing, and that's essentially what plagiarism is stealing. So, in order to avoid this form of stealing, you have to use different words, different phrasing, different sentence structure, different order, and you absolutely have to show where the ideas came from through the use of in-text citations and references. This is an example of a plagiarized assignment that was submitted in one of my courses. And as soon as I saw this paragraph, I knew that there were issues here. How did I know? Well, first of all, I could tell that this was not written in this student's voice. I knew this student, I knew the student's work, and I knew their voice. I knew how they wrote, and I knew that this was not their voice. That was my first clue. Also, when I read this very carefully, I realized that this paragraph doesn't really make a lot of sense. And so what I did was I pulled out specific sentences and I popped them into Google. So here you see in Google, I've put the first sentence of this paragraph: the risk factors that contribute to developing cancer are both interrelated and complicated, into Google. And I immediately found the page from which this entire paragraph was taken. Now, it's important to keep in mind that these sentences were not taken verbatim. They're not in the exact same order. And we can see here that the student did attempt to change a few words. So while the student sentence reads, the risk factors that contribute to developing cancer are both interrelated and complicated, we see that the original source says complex and interrelated factors contribute to the risk of developing cancer. Yes, those words are rearranged. Yes, one of the words is different. But I think we can all agree that this is fundamentally the same sentence. As we read through the rest of the plagiarized material, we see that many of the sentences are the same. For instance, the listing of SES, which includes income, education level, occupation, social status in the community, and geographic location. All of these are listed. exactly the same in the same order with no rephrasing of the words. And scrolling down to the bottom, we can see that although the student attempted to include an in-text citation, it's actually formatted incorrectly, and in fact, the in-text citation appears to just be taken from the references that are cited on this particular page, which is also a violation and a form of plagiarism. You can't simply look at the citations that are included in any source that you're interested in and pull some of those citations and put them into your paper. It's essential that you actually look at each individual original source and read what it says, and then you can include the citation, but you can't simply copy and paste citations from other sources. I include this example here both to illustrate how incredibly easy it is to identify plagiarism, but also to illustrate what I think is one of the key mistakes that students make. And that is that rather than reading lots of sources, evaluating lots of evidence, and preparing an outline to convey their own point, students often want to simply rearrange someone else's point. And that's very clearly what's happened here. The student took several sentences from a website that was related to the topic that she was writing on and rearranged them. And the result is something that doesn't make a great deal of sense, but more importantly, doesn't convey that this student understands the topic that she's writing about or has actually learned anything. And so that's why plagiarism, whether it's intentional or unintentional, is so problematic in academia, because it makes it so that faculty can't evaluate whether any learning took place, in addition to being outright stealing, which is also clearly a violation. It's also difficult in that it just makes it impossible for faculty to evaluate students effectively. So we've talked about paraphrasing as a way of avoiding plagiarism. Along with paraphrasing, so using different words and phrasing, using different sentence structures and different order of sentences, you also must always include in-text citations. This is where you include the author's name and the publication date, most commonly, depending on the reference style that you're using, in order to clearly indicate where every single piece of information that you include in anything you write is coming from. So in-text citations absolutely must be used whenever you paraphrase, whenever you're summarizing another author's argument, whenever you provide any fact that is not common knowledge, and important to keep in mind that if you use a direct quote, which in general you should avoid using direct quotes, you want to paraphrase and put things into your own words, but if you use a direct quote, the page number where that quote appears absolutely must be included. And oftentimes students will follow these guidelines and they'll look at their paper and they say, oh my goodness, this is all in-text citations. There's an in-text citation after everything. And I always laugh and say, well, yes, have you looked at published literature? That's what it looks like. So even though it looks very messy and students often think that they've done it wrong when they end up with so many in-text citations, in fact, that is actually the most appropriate way to do in-text citations. So always err on the side of providing more information, providing more citations, rather than saying, oh, I'm sure everyone knows what the cancer rate is for a particular group. No, that's information that you found somewhere, and so it has to be cited. Then lastly, related to in-text citations, is using references appropriately. So you want to use a consistent citation style, one that's appropriate to the discipline. So in public health, we most commonly use American Psychological Association format or American Medical Association format, and there's actually a specific format that's used by the American Journal of Public Health, a particular style of AMA that we tend to use. You can buy a style guide. APA publishes a new style guide every couple of years that provides reference format for every possible thing that you would ever want to reference, or use the online resources. There are millions of websites that will tell you how to appropriately reference any sort of reference material that you might need to reference. Or you might consider using a bibliographic management software. Common examples of this are EndNote, which UAB supports, or ProCite. Even Word, the word processing program, includes a form of bibliographic management software embedded within Word. And I cannot emphasize enough how much easier these software packages make writing papers, because you simply can import any citation that you're planning to use. Most online databases have a way of directly exporting citations and the PDF file of the article that you're looking at. And so then when it comes times to do your reference, you can just pop it in directly. It saves an immense amount of time at the end of writing a paper. So I'll close with just some general tips for avoiding plagiarism. You'll see that these are tips taken from the Indiana University Writing Tutorial Services. There are lots of resources online to help you avoid plagiarizing, but these are some that I think are very useful for students to think about. The first one is to put quotations around everything that comes directly from a text when taking notes. So as I said, you generally don't want to be using quotes. You want to put things in your own words. But often what happens is that students will write something down and then come back to it later and won't remember whether they paraphrased it as they were writing it or whether they wrote it as a direct quote. And so they may then include it in their assignment that they're writing and forget to put quote marks around it, and it ends up being plagiarism. So make sure that you put quotes on anything that's a direct quote right when you write it down so that you always know. Again, you want to paraphrase, but make sure that you're not just rearranging or replacing a few words. One technique that is recommended for paraphrasing is to read over what you want to paraphrase and then close it. Close the source, so close the book, close the website, close the PDF, and restate the idea in your own words. So that's the essence of paraphrasing. But the next step is also critical. Go back and check what you paraphrased against the original text to make sure that you haven't accidentally used the same words or the same sentence structure and order. And that way you can make absolutely certain that you're not intentionally or unintentionally paraphrasing by mimicking the original author's language. Remember, you are expected, you are supposed to take ideas from authors. What you can't do is steal authors' language and phrasing. You have to come up with that on your own. And then lastly, include in-text citations or references for every idea that you draw from another source. And again, this will feel painful, it will seem excessive. That's okay. Always err on the side of including a reference for anything that you draw from an outside source. So I'll close with just some general questions that you want to ask yourself anytime you're in a course and you have an assignment or an exam. And these will help you to avoid any form of academic misconduct. So the first thing that you want to ask is what degree of collaboration or consultation with any sort of outside source is considered appropriate for this assignment. Again, it could be different for different faculty members, it could be different for different assignments within the same class. So make sure that you are absolutely clear on what degree of collaboration is appropriate. The second thing you want to ask after you've prepared any written assignment or paper is whether the in-text citations and the references are adequate to allow someone to identify all of your original sources. So ideally, when I see a paper that a student has written, I should be able to find absolutely every single source and go through the exact same process that they did, find all the same original material. And that's only possible if the in-text citations and the references are adequately done. And then lastly, sort of a general question to ask yourself is, are you comfortable describing exactly how you prepared any assignment or exam to the instructor? If you're not, that probably indicates that you are in some gray area that could be considered academic misconduct. And whether it's intentional or unintentional, the consequences are the same. So I urge you to think carefully in any course, in any assignment, in any test situation. Are you comfortable saying exactly how you have prepared that assignment? And are you certain that you have actively avoided any form of academic misconduct? And if you're not sure, ask. Ask your instructor first. Ask the person who teaches your writing course. Ask your faculty advisor. Come find me and ask me. I am always happy to talk about academic misconduct and the potential consequences of engaging in academic misconduct. But if you ask, if you are operating under good faith, then there shouldn't be any problems, and academic misconduct should not be a concern in your academic career.